Okay, good morning. We are starting another early morning recent reads vlog. I have two books to talk about, but I'm only going to talk about one, even though I have so many thoughts that I would love to talk through that kept my mind running for so much time last night as I was finishing listening to this book. I let it play all the way through, and so it played the acknowledgments, and in the acknowledgments, the author mentioned her publisher, St. Martin's Press. The strike is still ongoing, so I will not be reviewing that book, which is a shame because I have so many thoughts about this book. It is my first read from a very popular author, historical fiction. Technically, it starts off my somewhat theme for this week's vlog in that it is a new release from this year that is probably going to be on the Goodreads Choice Awards. It's probably going to win its category, like the book I didn't talk about last year for last year's awards. And I have a sequel to that book that I'm going to be reading this week that I'm also not going to talk about. So is this actually a themed blog? Both of those books are published by St. Martin's Press, and can't really talk about it any more than that. I'm not going to spend any more time there. I'm going to talk about the other book that I read. That one I read via audiobook. This one I read on ebook, even though I do have a physical copy. It is Spaced Out by Stuart Gibbs, because I have a clicker for my Kindle, and it's just so nice to be able to just sit there all cozy up and just, even though this is a nice, fairly floppy, actually, it's not. I thought it was floppy, so it is nicer to read it via my iPad. So this is book 2 in a series that I started way before book 2. It was actually a series that I knew nothing about, but one of my students, a middle grader, a 7th grader, recommended to me. It was such a good recommendation. The setup for this series, you have something called Moonbase Alpha. That's the name of the series, but Moonbase Alpha is this base on the moon that they've set up, and they're trying to colonize the moon. And so this is the first of those places that they're setting up, and there's a whole bunch of scientists, and some of them have families. The main character, Dash, or Dashiell, is the child of 2 of those scientists. He deals with a lot up there because it's not this perfect thing that everybody thinks it is. There's a lot of privations. There's a lot of things that they have to do to be safe on the moon. There's a lot of things that they don't have. And also in the first book, there's a murder. It's actually a bit of a mystery. I tend to like the genre blends with mystery. But in this book, the commander, the base commander, goes missing. And because Dash successfully solved the murder in the first book, everyone kind of thinks, well, maybe he can solve this one too. So I really like how the mystery progressed, how Dash was interacting with his sister, with the bullies on base, because there are some space tourists that paid a lot of money to be there, and they think that means that they can take over everything and do whatever they want. I think this is just, it's hard to put into words. And my brain apparently is not functioning at full speed this morning, but I think this is really well done. The mystery is laid out well enough that it's intriguing. It keeps you reading. It's also relatable. Now, is the science exact? No, but I think it's more reasonable for a near future. I think it's in the 2030s, that it's potentially something that's possible. The way that Stuart Gibbs portrays Dash as a character, it makes living on the moon relatable, which, good job there. And I thought that this was an excellent, excellent book. Well written. I'm currently reading the 3rd and the final book in the trilogy, and I'm just really enjoying my time with these books. Okay, I'm back with another update. It is Friday morning. I have 3 books to update about. I'm not sure why I didn't update yesterday, because I had at least 1 book to talk about them. So the first book that I'm going to update about is Waste of Space. This is the next and final book in the Moonbase Alpha series. I talked about that in my last update with Spaced Out, which I read as an ebook, and then this I read as an audiobook. And in this, something has happened to the Moonbase where something about the creation of oxygen is deteriorating, but at such a rate where They're not in immediate danger, but they have to evacuate the base. When that came up, I was like, okay, this is a fitting way to wrap this up. But before that happens, there's another mystery to solve. In the first book, it was a murder mystery. Second book, someone went missing. In this one, it's an attempted murder. And once again, Dash is brought in to try to solve the crime. He does a pretty good job of that. One thing I noticed is that a lot of this reads a lot more mature than I would necessarily expect for a middle grade novel, but not so mature that it feels like a young adult or an adult novel. And I'm not sure exactly how to describe that, because it's not like middle grade novels talk down to the kids. I can't really think of how I would put that into words. But I really liked how things wrapped up in here. I will say, the antagonist family, the space tourist family, that is the only thing that really, really, really pushed the suspension of disbelief. The way that they act and the things that they let their kids get away with and the things that they do. Just like, people would really do that? But I think it wrapped up really well. There is an epilogue that wraps a lot of things up really well. And I think this is an excellent example of a sci-fi novel that middle grade students, I think, would enjoy. The next book that I read, it was going to be an arc, but then I realized that the arc that I have is of book 2, and I haven't read book 1 yet. So I read book 1, and that is Winston Choo versus the Whimsies. Again, this helps with my Rick Riordan Presents imprint project. This was a fascinating novel. It's not so much the type of fantasy where even you're getting into gods or anything. An incident happens at the very beginning, and this is in the synopsis. He's made a pie, or I think actually the aunt of the girl that he likes has actually made a pie, and he's taking it home 3 years before his father died in Iraq from a friendly fire incident. And he has an older sister who's in high school, has dropped out of high school, gotten her GED, and a younger sister who's only 3 years old, and like their father never met her. It opens on what he calls the dad-iversary, the 3-year anniversary of when his dad died. And his dad loved pie, so he wants to take this pie home. And he's skateboarding, and he thinks, he'll be okay. There's this aspect, I wonder if it's going to get addressed or not, but there are hissing squirrels that just randomly seem to drop out of the sky. As he's skating along, one of them drops out of the sky on top of his head, and he ends up dropping or throwing the pie that he's holding, and it smacks the guy in the face. Well, apparently this helps him save this really weird shop from being robbed. And so he and some of his friends who were skateboarding, I should say, with him, they go in. The owner's like, hey, you can have anything that you want. It has to be the first thing that you touch. And he ends up, and it's weird stuff in there. He ends up, a bird like falls, gets injured or whatever, and knocks over this broom and dustpan, very old timey, like made out of wood broom and dustpan. Before he realizes what he's doing, he grabs it to try to get the bird out and help the bird. That's what he ends up with. And then things start going missing, including his little sister. He then is trying to figure out what's going on and how to get back his little sister, and to, basically solve the mystery of what's going on. And so much is happening, and so many of these really important objects are going missing. And it made me so sad. Like, one of the things that goes missing is his goldfish that was a gift from his dad. It's the last thing his dad ever gave him before he went on shift out. And I was like, oh no. For me, those items that have that nostalgia, have those connections, that's something that really gets me. It's definitely a unique writing style. I haven't seen in other of the Rick Riordan Presents imprint books. I think Stacey Lee did an excellent job in creating a fully believable character. And it's nice that, again, we have another male protagonist. So many of these, especially middle grade books, there's a lot of female protagonists. There does seem to be a fairly good representation with the Rick Riordan Presents imprints books, and overall, I was connected and into this book throughout the entire reading experience, so I definitely recommend this one. Now the next one, it's a little complicated, so it's kind of funny. I legitimately was going to try to theme these vlogs, not blogs, and do more of one type or another. But if we look at the books that I've read so far this week, none of these are new release books. The other one that I have here that is a new release book, I'm not talking about, as I mentioned in the previous one. So I might get to 2 new release books. So much for trying to theme. I'm not necessarily great with that. Here is the next one that I read, and that is Dark Star Burning, Ash Falls White. This is a new release. I don't think it's going to be on the Goodreads list, but I read it because I had the audiobook version of it, and I wanted to read it before it returned, which is going to be like in 2 days. This is the sequel to Song of Silver, Flame Like Night. I got that one in, I think, an Illumicrate box, special edition. I did not purchase the sequel as a special edition. I actually purchased this at Barnes & Noble in their end of year sale. I have to admit, so I listen to this as an audiobook. The new habit that I've had is listening to it first thing in the morning. Just, that's the only thing that I'm doing. And I kind of really enjoy that way of getting into a story, having that be the start to my day. The problem is, when I'm just listening to something, some days it works and my attention is completely drawn. I don't nod off at all. Other days, I really have to fight it, which is frustrating because I don't know the difference on those days. Maybe it's my engagement with the book, because the days that I listened to that other book that I'm not talking about, I didn't come close to falling asleep. And I didn't like full out fall asleep, but I would notice, oh, I've missed a little piece here. I've missed a little piece there. I did notice that I wasn't necessarily engaging with this book at the same level as other books. My rating of the first book was a solid 4 stars. And I knew that this wasn't going to be an amazing overall story, but I did want to read the sequel, finish the series. This one, I knew probably at most would get a 4 stars. I think that's still what it's going to get, because I'm going to give it a little bit of the benefit of the doubt for my dozing off at different periods of time. Overall though, this felt a bit aimless. So I'm not going to get into a lot of the plot stuff that happens here, obviously because it's a sequel. It didn't seem as coherent and have a focused direction, because certain things would happen and I would think it was going in a certain way. But then we'd shift narrative and I'd be like, oh, there's that person. And then at convenient times, another character was introduced. Or the other character showed up where the other perspective character was. And it felt more convenient. But then you get to the end, and the way that it ultimately wraps up, like, that was so fitting. All of the threads were tied together so well. And a lot of times, my enjoyment of it, my experience with a book is really significantly affected by how the book ends and the taste that it leaves in my mouth. This left a very good taste in my mouth. I really enjoyed how it left off, how it wrapped everything up. It really fit. Amelie Wenzel was not afraid to go there with her characters. I'm struggling to come up with words because I literally just finished it about 20 minutes before coming on to film this update. I don't have obviously specifics to say about the book itself. I have to admit, like what I did before, that I did miss some pieces here and there, and maybe that would have raised my experience a little bit. I'm giving it a little bit of grace on that. But ultimately, it was the ending that saved the novel for me and kept it at a 4 stars and not a 3.5. Did I really talk details in here? No. How good of a review is this? I'm not sure. But I did enjoy my read. Was it amazing? Is it going to be a high 4 stars? Close to a 4.5? No. It's just barely gotten into the 4 stars and is going to stay in my collection. Okay, I'm here to wrap up this vlog. It's going to be on a bit of an odd note because towards the end of the week, I started reading more of my SCASL books, and instead of talking about those books twice, I'm going to put them in a completely separate video. I still need to film the video for the ones that I've already read, but I will say the middle grade list has started off super strong. I have loved all 3 of the books that I've read. Well, technically I'm not done with one of them, but I'm almost done with it. But all 3 of them have been really good. I think this year's list might be one of the best. Now, unfortunately, to go from that to something that didn't really work as well, I'm going to wrap up with Everybody Looking by Candice Illo. This is my Buzzwordathon book for this month. The buzzword was every. I went ahead and purchased this one because I was going to get it from the library. I got it from Thrift Books. Didn't spend too much on it. Unfortunately, it's not going to be in my library past May. This is not a terrible book. Obviously, it's a multiple award winner. It didn't work for me though. I thought it might though. I thought that it might actually do really well for me because the way that it's set up, it's told in verse. So an audiobook of a book that big was only 3 hours. It starts with the main character, Ada, at her high school graduation. And it goes through, I think, her first semester of college, but it's not straight linear all the way through that. There are flashbacks to various things that happened in her past. She talks about a lot of stuff here, a lot of incredibly hard-hitting things in here. It's a gut punch. It's not something I would necessarily recommend to everyone unless they had trigger warnings and they read discerningly. It's a tough read. But as the audiobook went on, I'm thinking of the timing of how much I have left to read on the audiobook and knowing all of this has to wrap up somewhere. But you get to the end and some of the decisions that she's making towards the end, they start to seem like she's changing directions, but then she doesn't. And the whole resolution part of what needs to happen by the end of the semester, or the end of the book, I should say, sorry, doesn't actually come. And where she leaves off at the end, I'm left wondering, what did she learn? Did she learn more about herself? Did she deal with this past trauma? What happened? In my review, I wrote, and then that ending. Or can I even call it an ending? In the typical plot pyramid structure, it didn't really end with any sort of resolution. And it didn't even reach, it sort of reached a climax point, but there was no denouement. There was no resolution. And it didn't work for me. And I'm struggling to come up with words for it. And I don't want to bash this book because the way that it is written, the mechanics, the actual writing style, the imagery that she creates is beautiful. And it really dives deep. But the book itself did not work for me, unfortunately. And somehow, when I looked on Storygraph to see how many books I'd read this month, it is May 12th? Yes, forgot. It's May 12th, and I've read 16 books. I have no idea how I've done that, except for the fact that, one of them in my pile that I didn't end up talking about because it kind of fell in between. It's really short. I've read several middle grade books that were very short. This book, I told you it was only 3 hours worth of an audiobook and I read a graphic novel. I still don't know how I've read 4 more books than there are days. And I'm really loving the act of reading. And it's really fun. And even though this last book that I talked about wasn't necessarily all that great, I've had 3 bangers in a row. I will just quickly mention them. I don't have physical copies of 2 of them. It's We Were the Fire by Sheila Moses. It talks about the children's protest in Birmingham in 1963. I think it was 1963. One of those years. Very well done. More detailed thoughts again in my SESL video for it. Then we have Playing the Turnaround. That one surprised me. I was really skeptical when I read the synopsis for it. That one really surprised me. It was so good. And then the one that I'm probably going to finish today or soon thereafter is A Duet for Home. Some things have been happening in the second half of this book that have just, hit me right in the feels. So that's 3 in a row that have been very well done. There you go. I'm wrapping up this school year with a lot of books read and hopefully a lot more to come in the summer. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.